Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Jackie Chin. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Jackie Chin from the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities. We used to be called Public Health England, and I'm in the London team. So welcome to our webinar on supporting the whole school approach to promoting mental health and well-being in primary schools. We're really pleased. You'll be hearing from our lead for London, Kirsty Stroud from the Department for Education, who will give an overview of the whole school approach. And then you've got colleagues from St Vincent's Primary School in Barnet and from Gateway Primary School in Westminster, who'll share with you, I guess, their approach and their learning and their insights. And then Kirsty will follow up a little bit about accessing the mental health grant. Can I encourage you, please? It will be quite informal. There'll be a chance for questions after each presentation. Can I encourage you to either put your hand up or put your questions in chat? And for you to connect with each other, could you introduce yourselves in chat if that's okay? And if you're interested in a particular area, others can perhaps connect with you, or in your geographical area, others can make connections. Hopefully that's it okay. If you could just go on mute unless you're speaking, that would be great. Okay, so can I hand you over? Brilliant. Thank you so much. Can I introduce you to Kirsty Stroud from Department for Education? I'm not sure if that buzzing is me. I'm going to go on mute. Kirsty, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. I'm just going to share my screen, and I'm not very good at talking while doing that. So there we go.
Can I ask a favor? If you're not speaking, just go on mute. Thanks. I think the buzzing stopped. Brill.
There we go. Hopefully it's not coming from me. That'd be very distracting. I'll jump ahead to my slide here. So yeah, hi, I'm Kirsty Stroud, and I work at the Department for Education in the Mental Health Delivery Division. Just very briefly, my background though is in schools, where I was a teacher for 20 years in a primary school in Islington in North London, and for 10 of those years I was, there's a bit of feedback, and for 10 of those years I was a deputy assistant head and deputy head, and one of the things I led on was the pastoral support, so I was the senior mental health lead and worked to try and develop the provision we had going on there, and now I bring that into my role here at the Department for Education. So I think I have about 10 minutes to talk to you and give a bit of an overview about the whole school approach to mental health and wellbeing. So I thought I'll start by talking about the key role that I think schools and colleges already play in supporting the mental health and wellbeing of the children at their setting, and then talk through the importance of a holistic approach so that whatever provision schools are already offering, it can be enhanced and it can be developed. And then at the end of the webinar today, I'm going to pop back up on screen again, and I'll finish off by sharing some information about the DFE's funded training to develop the role of a senior mental health lead in schools and colleges across the country. So that's a bit of an overview of what's coming your way from me. So why is there a need to develop and embed a culture that supports children and young people with their mental health and well-being? Well, I thought I'd begin by setting the scene for the mental health picture for young people by sharing these recently published statistics. So in 2022, 18% of children aged 7 to 16 years had a probable mental disorder, which is an increase from 12% in 2017. But I mean, this statistic really makes clear the prevalence of cases for young people, and that recent increase really reflects the impact of the pandemic and lockdown on the mental health, amongst other things. And of course, in schools, you're going to be acutely aware of the impact this has on the day-to-day, on the young people, their families, and of course, for you in schools who are dealing with the things that come through your door. There is a bit of feedback. I'm just going to mute if I can see where it's coming from. There we go. Yeah. That should do it. And then the second statistic there, that half of all mental health problems are established by the age of 14. I mean, I think that's really quite stark. That statistic there puts the spotlight on how vital mental health and wellbeing support is in childhood. In school really does represent a key time to work to prevent these widespread negative impacts before the issues can escalate and before they can become a real crisis. So if we can get it right in childhood with a focus on prevention and early intervention, then we will reap the benefits now, but also in later years. So following these statistics, I suppose it's clear that schools can play a really crucial role in the preventative and early identification approach, and facilitating mental health and wellbeing promotion and support through education settings is absolutely key. Schools, there you are, you're working directly with the children and the young people in the formative years of their lives. You are the professionals who know the children and young people best. You know the community, you know the families, you know the current issues that are coming your way, and you have that day-to-day contact with the children and their families, which allows for that prevention and that early identification to be far more effective, rather than services only ever really being accessed when issues have already escalated and they've become more critical and they've reached that referral stage. But of course, the other thing is that families will often be more likely to access the wider services through a school that they trust rather than accessing them directly. Which brings me on to the whole school approach, because I think really it's the fundamental way that we can get holistic and sustainable, that's the key, holistic and sustainable mental health wellbeing support to as many children and young people as possible. Now, this wheel in front of us here, it may well vary amongst you how familiar you are with these 8 principles of a whole school approach. And with limited time, I'm not going to talk through each principle one by one. Instead, what I thought is I would just point out, to start with, obviously, right there in the middle of the wheel, you can see the importance of school leadership and that buy-in that's needed. For holistic change to happen in a school, mental health and wellbeing has to be a valued priority by the leadership. So whether that's the wider senior leadership team, whether it's the governing body or trustees or middle leaders, but one member of staff alone cannot change the ethos and approach of a school. So for instance, the curriculum and policy changes can only be made from whole school decisions which are fed down into daily practice. The plans, the priorities you might have for staff development or for parental engagement, that needs to be done strategically. You'd be plotting it out, in a school calendar for the year with your short, your medium, your long-term plans. Maybe the student voice, you might be doing lots and lots of school councils or surveys, but really it's only as meaningful as the change that can be brought into practice at the school. Is there an ethos at your school that's, signs that a young person is struggling are going to be identified by all members of staff? Unless the staff are trained, that might not be a universal thing. So is there a culture to pass on all concerns, no matter how small? I know when I was working in schools, the staff were really, really skilled at spotting the really small things in a child. So it could just be a slight change in mood, or a child presents themselves slightly differently, or the behaviour wasn't quite what you're used to seeing, or one remark that's made to a member of staff at lunchtime or in the playground. Those sorts of things being picked up and being passed on means that the children you can spot things early and you can have the right support. And the other thing, though, of course, the school needs, if they're going to have really good, strong, holistic support, is you need to be able to work collaboratively with health colleagues. So if you're going to effectively triage the right support for the right particular needs, and even for education staff, I suppose, to stay up to date with what offers are out there locally, because it's quite an ever-changing landscape, the different support that you might have in your local area that you can pass children and families onto. So it's got to be health and education working together. Now, this slide is very busy, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but I did want to share it. I thought it was worth sharing just for reference, really. But when exploring your whole school approach to mental health and wellbeing, it can be really useful to view it through the 8 principles. Now, bearing in mind that, of course, no school is starting at zero by any means, I think that all settings, but they will no doubt have areas that they're looking to develop further, whether that be your curriculum and wanting to have more psychoeducation in there and teaching children strategies, or whether it be increasing your student voice about mental health and wellbeing needs, or working more with parents and carers, or maybe monitoring the impact of your interventions. But whatever your strengths or areas of development are, having a plan for how your school can move forward in its provision is going to mean it's going to be far more impactful. It's the same with any area of school development. The smart, effective approach is always with, a strategic action plan that you actually do follow through. It guides the work you're doing, rather than in a busy setting like a school being ad hoc and reactive to the things that are just coming at your door every day. So one person can't do it, but you do need somebody to be sort of leading on this and being the driving force to make sure it stays a priority at the school. Now, shortly, you're going to be hearing examples from a couple of senior leads, as Jackie mentioned, in schools across London. And when you're listening to them, it's worth bearing in mind that there'll be, we know that one size doesn't fit all, and one school will be very different to the next, but they will inevitably, the varied work they do will inevitably fit under these 8 principles. So it might not look the same in any 2 schools, but there will be consistency in how some of the best practice will be multifaceted. And the framework is a brilliant way of looking at the provision and how you want to develop it next. So no doubt, everything that gets talked about will fall under these 8 principles. And I've nearly finished. I just wanted to flag a few things. This resource here, it contains some case studies from mental health support teams across the country, with some examples of good practice specific to each of the 8 principles of a whole school approach. That is available online. There's a link which is embedded when you have these slides shared with you. But it's available online if you're signed up to the Future NHS Collaborative platform. But if not, I'm going to ask that it's shared when you get the slides shared after today. But as well as this, I also wanted to just flag up the fact that the DfE are developing 2 things which I think are going to really support schools with their holistic approach. One is what I would call is, I suppose, it's a toolkit to help schools and colleges to identify options and develop their targeted pastoral offer for pupils. And the other thing is an online hub, which is going to host a wide range of practical and evidence-informed resources for mental health leads. So they will be coming later this year. And just before I finish, I'm speaking quite fast to make sure I don't run over my allotted time, but I thought a really nice thing to finish with is a quote I heard from a head teacher. It was yesterday, actually, when I was at an event in the London Borough of Havering, and the head teacher of a primary school there, who she'd just had Ofsted at her school. And when the inspectors spoke to some of the children, a very common question, in fact, I think they always ask this question, they asked the children, would you know who to speak to if you were worried about something? And she said that there was one little girl who answered by reeling off the names of many people in various roles across the school that she could go to speak to. But then she finished by saying, but I wouldn't need to, because at this school they would spot that something wasn't right and they would have already come to help me. And I thought that it was just a really lovely quote that right there is, you know, a whole school approach at its best, really, isn't it? If the children know that they would be helped if they were struggling with anything. So I thought that was a nice note to finish on to kind of demonstrate whole school approach there in primary schools. And I think that's probably the end of my allotted time, so I'll hand back to Jackie and stop sharing.
It's Emma Chelsea. No one can ever pronounce it, so don't worry. Just to give you a little bit of background of myself, I'm a Year 6 class teacher. I'm also a member of the safeguarding team. I'm the PSHE lead, senior mental health lead, and currently now at St Vincent's, we've actually, for Barnet, we have opened up a mental health hub at St Vincent's, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. But I'm sort of here today to explain a little bit about mental health and wellbeing at our school and how we implemented Anna Freud's training. So firstly, to all of you who are working in a school, I think you'll be surprised at how much you are already doing, because I think you don't realise that. I know how overwhelming the senior mental health lead job role can seem. And I found what I did when I started was it was quite overwhelming and you can feel alone. So I want you to know that you're not alone, and it does get easier and you'll probably already feel a bit better doing it. But what I found is actually finding out what your job role would be as a starting point, just to understand what does it entail, what would actually help you and help your school. What I found from the Anna Freud training was they had sort of 5 steps that you would work together with that you can see on your screen. I couldn't put too much information on because obviously I'm here to tell you that I do think you should do the course as well, and you'll see why. And so Anna Freud has loads of resources. We started with number 1, which was leading change. Now, we already had a mental health policy, but after the training, we sort of tried to review the policy, and we've got a little bit of support from our PSHE lead as well, and also Jane Abbott from Resilient Schools, to ensure that we were trying to hit all aspects of school. Sometimes it can change depending on whether you're at primary school or secondary school, what you need to consider in your policy. We then found that we were preparing the school community for change. So we work quite closely with BICS, Barnet Integrated Clinical Services, and we also had a very good relationship with Hughes, which was the Health and Emotional Wellbeing Service. They're part of sort of like CAMS in schools. And what we did is we invited them into school, and we invited parents and all of the children, and we held an assembly. We tried to introduce wellbeing. In the beginning, everyone was very scared to use mental health and wellbeing. They weren't sure if we could even say those words, not to scare away people. But the more you start to use those words, it tends to destigmatize it. So what we started with is this big assembly, and then we started putting little things to prepare our school for change. We introduced emotions books in every classroom, apart from reception, because they're sort of doing mental health and wellbeing consistently and they don't always realise. But we have these books that are between the teacher and the child, and they're actually locked away in the cupboard so that the child knows that it's between just the teacher and them, and it's where they can share good things, bad things, or they might just want to talk about it. Some children love it, some children don't need it. We also be mindful, don't always do it after that break time when they've had an argument with their friend. Otherwise, it looks like every time you're doing it, it's negative. So we also, as a school, had to look at, don't have the same time every day, do what works for your children. By the time you get to year 5 and 6, they just ask you, can I go and get my book? Can I leave it in there? We also put up around the school a sort of a post-it note system where they can ask, they can secretly take off a post-it note, write that they want to speak to myself or their teacher, and then that's up in the school and we made the children know about it. We also I really push circle time. I know if you have teachers in here alongside being the mental health lead, there's a lot of, I know it's work, but that conversation, even if it's 10 minutes at the end of each day, you can really, what we do for children impacts them so much. And I think everything you say, you don't realize. So have that time, 10 minutes in the day that you can just simply, it's an open space and you speak with them. So our leading change, we then also, after an assembly, we started dedicating certain assemblies in our school for children to focus on that. We celebrated wellbeing weeks, wellbeing days for the children, and they would showcase their work. We also quite lucky that we have a nice dance teacher that we would work on specific songs, and she would actually put on with different classes dances where there was the children weren't speaking, they would just sort of dance to express what they felt about mental health and well-being. For number 2, working together. Now, the whole school community, we wanted to bring parents more involved. We found parent involvement was really, really hard. So we decided that we have now a parent rep in every class. They don't just deal with the mental health and well-being, they deal with all sort of things that go on in school. But we thought by having a rep in each class, it would help us to target and get the voice out about what we're doing. It had its positive and negatives. After I attended the training, I realized what we could do a little bit better. And I wasn't sure whether or not I could, sorry, I might need to change the room because the signal in here is not good. So what we did was, I want to show you my website after, if I can share my screen. I wasn't able to mention it before, but we made an actual, on our school website, we made a section specifically for well-being. It tells the parents what's going on in our school, and it actually shows all of the elements you can access in terms of external agencies. What we try to do though is we really try to identify a need. We get them to meet with their class teacher first. So this is sort of 2 and 3 that come together with the Anna Freud. We identify the need, we bring in the parents, we just have an informal chat with them. The mental health lead isn't brought in straight away because we want to hear from the parents. We want to see if they're having the same concerns at home or if it's just at school. Then we decide what the next steps may be. So the next steps from that might be the senior mental health lead needs to get involved. They'll then have a conversation with the family, and then they decide, do they need to have external agencies involved, or is it at school level? We found that there are a lot of agencies you don't realize that are out there that are free, that can support you. And we've recently, as a result of the Anna Freud, we also started getting pupil voice for the interventions, because Bix and Hughes and CAMS, they do their own pupil voice, but they don't always need to share that with us because obviously it's their intervention. So we started our own one at school to try and see whether or not the children found it effective, did they enjoy it, if they felt safe. We have now specifically a room, it's called a nurture room, and we also have a sensory room. I know that's not always possible in school, but where it's away from everyone. So essentially no child is seen when they're in there, because some children do also feel uncomfortable, especially as they get older. So just be mindful of that. We then try and make sure the parents are on board. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, it can take 2 to 3 years. Times are changing. It can depend on the culture, but just know, don't give up. Because it will get to a point, if you build that trust with them, and that's what I think is the key of the senior mental health lead, where there's no judgment and there's trust, they will eventually come around because they know how much you care for the children. The understanding need, this is where the slide you can see just up on your screen now. What we try to do is, I'll also maybe forward to Kirsty our school website where you can find further information, but there's things like the strength and difficulties questionnaires. Anna Freud also really nicely give you a whole questionnaire, pupil one and a parent one, pupil one and a staff one. And the easiest way we found, put it on a Google survey, because that way it gives up the information on an Excel document so much easier. We kept doing paper copies of pupil surveys, pupil voice, and it was really hard to collate the data, and it ended up being me at the computer for hours, and it wasn't very productive. Then what we do from that is we look at all the individual comments, and we mainly focus on the positive, but anyone where there might be a really severe need, or you can clear is a cry for help, we would then try and talk to the children privately as a one-to-one, very informal, but we'd make sure that they're aware that it's the result of the pupil voice. So we were very open and honest with them and said, we want to know how to help you. So whatever you put on here, we presume you're comfortable enough to talk about it after. So that was sort of a start with the children. We then tried to also bring parents in, and for the first time ever, we had about 30 parents that came in. And on that, we also invited BICS, and they gave a little bit of a webinar on, not webinar because it was in person, but on how to manage your children's anxiety. So that was a really good way. I'd really advise you to try and not just understand the needs of the children, but the families, because if you don't have the families understand their needs, there's no point. You won't help the children as much as you can. We then were able to promote wellbeing further. We have rights respecting ambassadors in school that would really try and push on the getting the word around. They would go out to the playground, try and see how they can help reception, key stage 1. And the one we're focusing on now is also supporting staff. We've almost got so much implemented for the children that we need to also refocus on the staff. We do little things like wellbeing breakfast. Certain schools do wellbeing days where the head teacher allows maybe an hour out or an afternoon out, just to look after your staff. It might be your Christmas party, it might be yoga after school, but it's also looking at what your school can manage, because sometimes when teachers are finished at school, they want to go home, and that could be their thing to do. So that's okay too. It might just be you need milk in the fridge for tea and coffee. It might be as simple as that for your staff, but also get their voice. And my advice would be, get their voice, but do something with it. And it will have to be, you go through everything. And that sometimes can take a long time, but it's worth it. Is it okay if I share my screen just to show
Yeah, go for it.
Is that okay? Sorry.
Definitely.
Then I'll be open for questions so I don't go over time.
Thank you. Can colleagues be thinking of questions for Emma? What an amazing program that you've offered.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah.
Can you scroll it down a bit?
Yeah, sure. So what happens is at the top here, we've got wellbeing.
Yeah,
I'll just click on it for you. And then what we have is, so we've recently set up a wellbeing hub, and we're inviting all the schools in Barnet. So it goes through what different supports we have. We let the parents and anyone who wants to come, what we offer. And we also have a direct link to the different places they can go, because sometimes they're not always ready to come to us. Then we have our own actual mental health and wellbeing blog, because we want to normalize it. The children need to know now more than ever. And this is where we put everything up about what we are doing. So in our hub, we're also trying to support mental health leads. So I'd really advise you try and get it on your school website, make it like normalize it. I think you're doing already amazing, but also work with the services you can. So now BICS, they're also coming in, they're going to work with staff and children on how to do peer mentoring. I don't know, Kirsty, I know you were saying about the online hub platform, but I'd love to link up with you and give you the feedback from the mental health leads in Barnet, what we would need, what would support us online. But I think the Anna Freud helped us realize, 1, how much we are doing, 2, it gave us a bank of resources, and 3, it made us realize what to keep, what was necessary, and what else we had to do moving forward. So thank you. I hope I've stuck to time. I think that was 10 minutes.
Yeah. Emma, thank you so much. That's absolutely amazing. Well, really good reminder that actually we're doing a lot of this. A lot of the schools are doing this.
The senior mental health lead role, just to kind of say a few words about that before I go into the training for the role, is that we definitely regard it to be a strategic leadership role in a school. It's absolutely not somebody who you would expect to be doing any clinical work. It's not that kind of training. It's training in how to lead and facilitate your provision. I suppose in many ways it's quite comparable to the role of a SENCO. We don't expect the SENCO in a school, which is now, everyone understands what a SENCO does, but we don't expect them to be running around school carrying out every intervention for the children with special needs, and we don't expect them to be experts in every different type of special needs that they find children at their school have. But what you do expect from the leadership in your school, whether that be a SENCO or in this case a senior mental health lead, is you expect them to have expertise in facilitating and taking something forward and being the advocate and being the driving force. So it would be, you're the person who connects up with external professionals. You're the person who maybe has the plan for the CPD for your staff. You're the person who organises the referrals and the rooms available for any people coming in, works closely with the parents and carers, keeps the messaging up, keeps the priority up. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a senior mental health lead. I'm not talking about a clinical professional. I'm talking about a member of the education staff and the staff team who just leads on it in their school. So to help skill up a member of staff, because it's not something necessarily that somebody might be tasked with it in a school but not feel equipped to lead on. So to help skill up a member of staff in schools, there is quality assured training available, and that's to support the designated lead for mental health and wellbeing to develop their strategic approach. And all the training, of which there are lots to choose from. It's great there to hear Emma talk about the Anna Freud training that she did. Anna Freud is one of over 100 that are available out there, but whichever one you do go on, they are all underpinned by the 8 principles of whole school approach, which I referred to before. So that's why they're pretty fundamental to the work you'd be looking at. And it's also worth noting that the take-up is available to schools and colleges across the country. But in December, I just checked the stats recently, I think approximately 47% of eligible settings across London had claimed the grant, which is actually slightly below the national take-up, which is more around the 50% mark. So we need a bit of a push in London to raise awareness and hopefully get more people trained up, and then therefore the provision and the children, young people benefiting from that. So information about it. So the grant is for £1,200 per setting, regardless of which of the quality assured courses is chosen. As I said, there are over 100 now to choose from, and there is a tool to help guide you to choose the right one for you, because the feedback we're getting as people are coming out the other side is so positive, particularly so where the delegate has chosen a course that's a really good fit for them. But when you're trying to choose which is the right course for you, it varies in terms of the level of experience, whether you see yourself as being a beginner, intermediate or advanced, whichever it might be. So what experience and expertise you bring, different time commitments. Some are online, some are face-to-face or maybe a hybrid. Some are aimed at particular education setting types. So you might find that suits you better, particularly if you work maybe in alternative provision, for instance. And there are different price brackets. They do have different costs attached, but the grant is a flat rate of £1,200, regardless of which course you choose. And as Emma made reference to, the vast majority of the courses fall under that amount, which means you've got some surplus, which can be used to cover supply costs or possibly buy extra resources, maybe. So there are some conditions for what you use that surplus for, but it's great, it's there. It's money in the bank for your school, which is good, and to help the wellbeing and mental health provision. And all the links you might need to search out the courses available, they're all embedded in this PowerPoint, which is going to be shared with you. Also available on our gov.uk website, and I can put the link for that in the chat. But in terms of how do you apply, it's essentially, I think of it as three steps. The first step's really straightforward. You click on a link to Form 1. As I said, the link's in this PowerPoint, but that doesn't help you until you have the PowerPoint. I will put the website link in the chat. But you click on Form 1, and that's just a few minutes, that job, where you just put in the details about you and your setting, and that will tell you whether or not you're eligible. And then if you are, it automatically should essentially assign the £1,200 for your school, puts it in a pot reserved for you and your school. Then you spend some time just searching the course options out there, choosing the right one for you. Once you've decided, you can book onto that course. And as soon as you've done that, you can then click on to Form 2, which just means you have to upload the confirmation that you've booked the course. And then that will trigger the payment to come to your school or your college. So and the payments are made in quarterly windows. So the longest you ever have to wait for that payment to reach your school would be 3 months. But actually the next one, if you were to sign up very soon before the end of this financial year, the next payment window is the end of March. So that's the process for making sure you can claim that grant. And just before I do finish talking about it, and then I can take some questions, I thought I'd just share some really nice feedback from people who've come out the other side of the training now. There's one here from a primary school I'll read out, which is, by pulling together everything we were already doing as a school community and making a few small but impactful changes, I was able to make sure that we are fully covering the 8 aspects of a whole school approach to mental health and wellbeing. The school now has an improved support offer, and the training has been hugely helpful. I've lost my place now. You're probably reading it better than I am while I'm on the course. Hugely helpful in identifying areas where more work is needed over the next year. So that really chimes with what Emma's already been telling us about how you could see what you're already doing and actually celebrate that, and then what you can add on and work to do next. I was also on a call with some senior mental health leads in Cheshire last week before, a few weeks ago, and there was a couple of them gave some really great feedback. One was a primary senior mental health lead, and to quote her, she said something to the effect of, in her 15 years of teaching, it was by far the best course she'd been on. So that was praise indeed. And there was a secondary head teacher who he's the senior mental health lead at his school, and he was just so enthusiastic from the course he'd done. He said that he felt really empowered to drive forward the mental health and wellbeing provision at his school following the training. He said that how did he word it? He just said that he felt more confident, I suppose, because mental health and wellbeing is something you don't necessarily have the language for or feel the confidence to lead on in a school, especially because, of course, staff in schools, your training is all in pedagogy, assessment, teaching and learning, planning. So he said, but actually it really empowered him and gave him the confidence that he felt confident enough to run some staff meetings about psychoeducation and emotional regulation. And then he also lined up to have all his staff trained in trauma-informed practice, because he was so enthused and really bought into it. He wanted it to be underpinned in everything all his staff did across the school. So they were just real advocates of the training, which I think was wonderful to hear, and hopefully the same will be for if we can get trained senior leads across the schools and colleges across the country. I think the benefits for the children and young people will be huge. So because we can really enhance the provision that's already there. And I think I'll probably leave it there and see if there's any questions, and hopefully Claire will be able to join us soon.